Oh, hello. How are you?
Didn't see you there.
Yeah, I know. It is Wednesday. We are Debate Sensei. We got Tim from San Diego, causer of problems. We got Jared, founder of problems. All right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Not bad. Not bad.
What are we talking about this week?
This week, we are talking about data collection, biometric data collection, biometric recognition, and whether or not we should ban it. Now, what we're doing is we're using the NSDA topic. What is it? The public forum topic?
Yep, the April public forum topic, which will consequently also be the state tournament. So the state championship tournament. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, there you go. All right. So we're trying to put out some information that might be helpful for people coming up in the state tournament for NSDA, a fine organization, nationwide organization for speech and debate. Yeah. So the resolution proper is United States federal government should ban the collection of personal data through biometric recognition technology. There we go.
Yeah. So the piece of that resolution that I was like, wait, how do you just ban biometric recognition technology? It is the collection of personal data.
Yeah.
That's the piece that I think and is the real sticking point and like gives any ground to this being a debate, because like biometric recognition data is pretty ubiquitous, right? Like the fact that all of us unlock our iPhones using a Face ID at this point, and like a million other apps you can use iPhone's Face ID, or like Android has had that for many generations, but Apple was called geniuses for implementing it 5 years later. Like that kind of thing is not new. Or like the thumbprint that used to be the way you'd unlock your phone. Like all that kind of stuff is all biometric data and used for security purposes. But collecting personal data using biometric tracking, that's where I think it starts to get much more sticky.
Okay. So, yeah, we're already getting into the the definitions, right?
Yeah. So collecting personal data, like that's been a really big debate anyway. So like the GDPR was like England's version of trying to crack down on websites collecting too much information about people. That's why you have to click the super obnoxious allow all cookies button on every website ever. So you can thank the EU for like forcing that through. And California has similar things with I think it's CCPA to try and similarly protect users from having too much information collected. And honestly, like Google and Instagram and companies like that are having to back down. Like they're getting less data and are having to back down on just how much they track. So that whole larger trend is kind of going in the direct, like the pendulum is swinging a little bit in the direction back of users having more control over their data or just not being collected quite as much. But the use of biometric tracking is, this is kind of news to me. I didn't realize that was quite as like popular as it was.
What, using biometric to track everything? So like face and thumbprints and stuff like that for tracking everything?
Yes, but like the government, not that the government is using it, but like the companies will use that for tracking like personal information. So not just like using it so that you can log in, like the fact that I can log into my banking app using my Apple Face ID. I don't think that is the collection of personal information using biometric technology. I think that is me using biometric technology to access something else. However, if Apple takes the fact that I connected my Face ID to my banking app and then says, this user, Tim Seavey, uses this particular bank and sells that to other banks to market and share something, that is where I think it is the collection of personal data using biometric information.
Man, that gets a little tricky. like you're gonna have to be really clear when you get to those definitions, you know what I mean, and not
Yeah.
go over the heads of your audience. So you got to find a way to really explain that in simple terms, because you're kind of splitting hairs there.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I can see how people are thinking, oh no, if it has facial recognition technology, then by definition it is collecting personal data through biometric recognition technology.
Hmm.
You gotta, yeah, I mean, I think it would help you on the affirmative to make that distinction.
Yeah. I
It's
think on the negative, you're gonna have. I think it's gonna end up behooving the negative side to really build a mountain out of that of like this technologies are ubiquitous. We're already using it everywhere. It's the way of the future. It's safer. It's better. Blah blah blah. Like just go ham on like you. I mean, you get status quo in your favor, and you also even get like the direction that technology is going in your favor. So the affirmative side actually has a pretty uphill battle, in my opinion, of like trying to disprove the way that like the world is going. It's kind of like saying like, oh, we should ban cryptocurrency. Like, well, yeah, there's some problems, but it's pretty heavily adopted at this point.
yeah,
So it's at least that's the negative side should make it seem like they're just banning all biometrics. So I imagine one of the questions that will be asked in Crossfire all the time is, are we banning all biometric technology? And they'll have to say no, or that'll be like one of the first rebuttals, like, no, we're not banning all of it. It's just this piece about personal data collection.
well, I also think that like you could just have the federal government ban its collection of personal, data through biometric technology.
Would that be parametricizing? Like, what's the actual should ban the collection of personal data through biometric recognition technology? Huh.
Like, I don't
Yeah,
think
no, I think that actually narrows it down too much because if it's just the government banning their own collection, but like Facebook and Apple and everyone else is free to do it, then like I don't think they get a whole lot with that.
well, no, like I think that it actually, I don't know. The negative has actually a lot of ground because biometric recognition technology is used for like tracking terrorists at airports and things, and so the facial recognition technology is used for like national security purposes.
Right.
And so I think it actually like opens up its own debate that is nowhere near resolved itself. But like, telling like Apple that it can't use facial recognition technology to open up phones anymore seems like, if you want to avoid that debate, then you could,
Yeah.
just like narrow it down to the USFG. And I don't think that necessarily takes all that much ground away from either side. I think it's still very, very debatable.
Okay, so say that we do go that route. So like, where you're going through like a passport checkpoint at an airport, a lot of them will have those little machines now where like you have to stand in front of it, and it moves up to your face and takes a picture and prints
Yeah.
out the thing. Like you have to turn left and right. So it like that's biometric tracking, like to validate that you are the person that is on the passport that is scanned in. So they're trying to, I guess, like crack down on passport fraud and like people, moving over borders illegally. So I guess you on the affirmative have probably some grounds of like ICE, I imagine, probably uses that. So like pick the biggest villain that is using biometric tracking technology. Maybe the NSA is using it like for domestic surveillance. And I think as soon as it's kind of funny that in surveillance debates of like, CCTV and stuff like around the world, we never really particularly care the US is spying on everyone else. It's as soon as they're spying on us, we're like, whoa, 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 whoa. That's far. Like, you can know what absolutely every other political leader around the world ate for breakfast and what their children's, favorite color is, but you're tracking us? Like,
Yeah.
I like to do my piracy in peace. Thank you very much.
Right.
So
Right.
those things, I think,
yeah.
and this is like certainly domestic surveillance, or at least surveillance within, I suppose you could say like to all migrants coming into the US as well. So yeah, I would just start picking those big villains and be like, here's why they're using it. They're using the guise of national security, and that same guise is what's keeping, tons of people in ICE detention facilities because they don't have the right paperwork to match shit that is like, domestic, that like biometric data is trying to match up with some other kind of antiquated paperwork. So maybe that's the
Right.
thing is like, it's trying to mush a really new with really old technology systems, and it only just further complicates the bureaucracy.
Yeah, I mean the affirmative gets to kind of answer back with a bit of their own racial disparity stuff where, like, as of right now, biometric technology has shown to have its own level of bias, where it has like false positives for more often for people of color than for white people. And so I think that both sides can have that sort of, discussion about civil rights and who gets, preferential treatment as a result of this policy or not passing this policy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think it's a runaway necessarily with that one.
Another one, just from like, I think the broadest sense, is that theoretically it is a much safer form of security. Like it's a better biometric, recognition is better at being able to validate that this person is the person they say they are. Like, I can give you the 6-digit passcode to my phone and then anyone can access it. But I can't hand you my phone and you unlock it unless your face is my face.
Okay.
So it just like kind of ensures uniqueness of a person. And there are some biometric mechanisms like fingerprint scanners, or even there's one that I was reading about is vascular technology, or vascular scanning. So it can like determine your vein patterns. And apparently that is even more unique to a person than fingerprints. And so that's like the strongest version, like even more than an iris, I guess, like than eye scanners. So that's kind of neat, right? Like someone probably, like, maybe you can swipe someone's fingerprint, maybe you can even swipe like an image of their eye, but you're probably very unlikely to swipe their vein structure.
Right. Right.
Sort of neat in that idea is, so on the negative side, you've got all this ground of like, this makes everyone safer. It it is the closest we can get to ensuring that like a positive is a positive and like identification is accurate.
Right, because the alternative is, if you ban it, it's kind of like, not using technology also has a decent level of racial bias to it, because now it's, like what's the
police lineups, right? Like I think that will be the joke, is like, or that will be like an argument that can be brought up, is like the fact that we still have to this date police lineups where a witness has to pick out of a room of 6 people, like that's the one who did it. We're going to look back at that practice and find that absolutely hilarious in a few years. Like, what a ridiculous like tool we used to do, because apparently those things are very infrequently successful. Like there's all kinds of stats on that like, because it's such a traumatic event, witnesses' ability to pick out specific features and like differences between people are super low. It's not their fault. That's like the way that the human brain remembers shit. And so if you put really similar looking people in a room, biases are on full display in that moment, with like, a witness identifying someone, and like real criminals get off because their, defense attorney is able to get a bunch of really close doppelgangers to them in the lineup room. And it's like, well, cool. Like there's, just further classism in the law allowing criminals to get away with stuff.
Yeah, sometimes the doppelgangers aren't even doppelgangers. I mean, they just find some cop and put them in street clothes. You know what I mean? It's just like, we just need a 6th person or something like that. And it just, yeah. And so,
or just find someone that, like, if I'm a defense attorney though, and I'm trying to get my client off, let me just find like 6 of the meanest looking people that I can, and put them like that are similar looking, but like have a real nasty demeanor, and like, oh, now it's thrown off and that witness is invalidated. Like it's a very old school, feels like it's just a very inaccurate, imprecise tool, I should say, an imprecise mechanism for identification of a person. And eyewitnesses, that's a challenging thing, right? But I think you start getting into surveillance at large as like a bigger challenge. So biometric recognition, I imagine, is also already in place in stadiums and things. So who was that I was talking to? They were at they were a guest to like the Republican National Convention. And so like they got a ticket to go in, and someone in their party, they got like 3 steps into the building, and someone in their party got pulled out by security. And they're like, it was some random crime, but there was a warrant out for them. They had like some really significant unpaid, I think it was like child support or something, like you actually have a warrant out for your arrest if you bail on it. And so that person got pulled, and they're like, how? I didn't have like an ID to scan, and I just walked through the security line. But because it was a political event, their security is so significant, they are doing biometric scanning on every face that comes in. So it was really heavy. Actually, you know what? It came up in the AI debate. When we
Oh.
were talking about, we were talking with Indubitably, they were
Mm.
talking about like the ability for people to be picked out of a crowd is like, super high at this point. And faces are all being tracked in large crowds to identify people, particularly like people of interest. But like that starts to get scary. That feels very like Minority Report, right?
Yeah. And that's Indubitably, everybody. Check out their podcast,
Cool
especially the
people.
one where we have our human versus AI debate that we participated in.
Yeah.
Anyways, little
Plug for
shout out
Indubitably
to some
there.
friends.
So that was like, and that's using AI to like, all right, cameras everywhere, track humans, track those faces, run those faces like biometric data against a database of wanted persons, and like, catch in people of interest, like that probability goes really high. So I think you've probably got some good, slightly more critical arguments about like the surveillance of the state, like just how much surveilling should the state be allowed to do? Is that constitutional, right? Like, is that unlawful search and seizure, right? Like, I agreed to enter this concert, or I agreed to attend this event. I did not agree to have my biometric data scanned against a database of people that hadn't paid parking tickets, right?
Right.
Like,
That gets into it like a freedom of movement and a freedom of association issue, right? Like First Amendment issues start becoming start rising to the surface, because if you're afraid to go anywhere, that is a chilling effect, and that is something that is not kosher when it comes to like constitutional arguments. And so if you are
yeah,
feeling like you are trapped at all times because you like the government is always watching you and is going to pick you up, and now start thinking about politicians who might have less than noble purposes, and they're going to be at the helm of these tools. And if they just say, well, I don't like this one dissenting voice right here, so I'm going to put a little a tracker on this person, and I'm going to have them get picked up for little infringements here and there. Like,
right.
you can start targeting people so much easier that way, just because
Right.
the tool is available.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, one of the big issues when you are talking surveillance, is just how is it being used? Because it's not a perfectly fairly implemented system. So I think we've talked about like the use when we're talking about AI here pretty regularly, the use of AI for police surveillance with like shot tracking, or like hearing gunfire and then dispatching police to that area. Where those tracking systems are set up are now going to be policed a whole lot more, which kind of supercharges all kinds of issues about over policing some neighborhoods compared to others that get into racial and socioeconomic disparities as well. So I think like this just makes that even a step further of just who is being surveilled and why. And then it's the humans that are behind it, like the logic that's built into this software, also contains the biases of the people writing it.
Yeah.
So I heard a really interesting argument that was talking about AI tracking, and it was I think it was with like chatbots and things, but they're saying that like the representation of different groups in the programming cohort, like the people that are writing the software,
Right.
ends up reflected in the logic that comes out the other end. So it's not just a perfect, like the computer is learning all things equally. The computer is learning what a 35-year-old white programmer from Silicon Valley believes to be good or true or just.
Right.
That logic and that like moral system that is baked into AI. And so I think that there's probably some significant overlap here that you can end up getting into those arguments.
Yeah, I think the that has played out in a number of different sort of AI debates, and this biometric collection would also be that as well. I think there's some like technical things that you could get into. You kind of alluded to it before, which was like whether or not the government can do this, which is why I went towards is like, oh, well, why don't we just have the federal government like be prohibited from collecting the data itself, because the jurisdiction issue comes up, right? It's like whether or not they have the ability, like, so like when you bring up like Apple and facial recognition, I'm kind of like, yeah, I don't know if they can do that. I don't know if that would hold up in court. And so that would actually, I think that would bolster the argument that the USFG restricting itself is the only affirmative case that you could do. Like that would be the only
anything else is
one.
extra topical.
Yeah, everything else would be like just like unconstitutional inherently. So this, and then you can get into those you can make it just as constitutional debate if you wanted to. That would be pretty interesting.
So the technology one, I think, is a neat one too. I started down that path but didn't conclude it. So I was saying that like the whole, vascular tracking, like that's really, really effective and like super hard to spoof and super hard to hack or whatever. But that apparently is also like
what that does is that gives like if I don't know how Public Forum handles counterplan ground, but that's a really good sort of counter. Like you're like, yeah, you know what? We should ban facial recognition technology, but I think vascular recognition technology is perfectly fine. And so now you carve out a little bit of biometric data collection where you're like, this is okay. All right. Like you're right. There's problems up until that point. But now that we reach this point, there's a tipping point that we've reached, and we can trust this because it is so unique. It's not racial. It's, they might have that ability.
I think you'd probably just have to start arguing like the practicality of that. So like the number of places that are able to implement that vascular tracking are super limited. Like I don't think that concerts or large venue halls or things like have that degree of tracking. I think facial and thumbprint are probably like far and away, and also even voice are probably the most commonly used right now. And I think you can make a pretty good argument. Doesn't have to get anything complicated at all. That like, sure, that seems to be safer, but it becomes a one hack fits all. If some hacker gets access to my fingerprint, if they get access to my password, I'm told to update my password. I can change a password, and the only place it lives is in my brain, right? But I can't change my fingerprint. I can't change my eye. I can't change my voice recognition. So like, if someone gets access to one thing, they've got access to everything. And you could say, sure, it's non-unique if they get one of my passwords. If I'm dumb and use the same password for everything, they've got most of it. True, but I can still change that. If I can't change the other things, I am permanently compromised from a security standpoint. Especially if all that information is stored in like one, single database. So it's not even that they steal my fingerprint. Like, we talk about these large companies like Home Depot got hacked or something, and they've lost like millions of people's personal information. Well, that's those people's like homedepot.com account logins and stuff. If they got access to, a large database like that, but everyone's fingerprints, now no one's fingerprints are reliable, right? Like, because that they could have been hacked, or they maybe now have plausible deniability into all kinds of crimes because they're like, oh no, I wasn't, that wasn't me. Someone had hacked my fingerprint. So therefore, anytime my fingerprints are found somewhere, it's totally possible that was, a bad actor that was just using stolen fingerprints. Same thing with irises or voice or whatever. So I think it actually kind of, in that way, erodes the validity of a security. Like it points out that like it's actually not as secure as just an idea of a password that I can write out, and makes it such that like one hack means that entire practice is now invalid.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more compelling arguments. You know what I mean? Because it's pretty unique to the topic. It's not just the security versus privacy, on steroids type of thing that you're used to. It's like, security, privacy. It gives you a little bit more definition, something more to hang on to. Like, that story is really good. Some other sort of like technical arguments that people could do would be like, I'm wondering how you would enforce this. I really am wondering, like, okay, so what happens if somebody does start collecting biometric data? I mean, like, what is the method that you're using to, I mean, like, if Apple is kind of like, no, we have facial recognition technology, we're going to continue using it. Like, how do you make them stop?
Well, there's an FBI case when it was I think it was like the shooting in San Bernardino, and they were like, FBI said to Apple, like, release, like, you need to
break into this phone,
and they wouldn't do it. And they're like, because if we open that door, it can't be unopened, and so. But they won the case, and they were not allowed. They were not forced to give the FBI access to it.
And with that sort of precedent on the books, like, I'm a little like, that's another reason why, being like a self-enforcement seems to make more sense to me.
Even still, so how would they enforce themselves? Just like take out all I think you'd have to identify the various places, and this be worthwhile knowing. I don't know right now, but all of the places where the government is currently using biometric scanning. So probably for like, clearinghouses and things, for, certainly like passport checkpoints, Century passports and checkpoints and things like that. So any of those places, but I wonder, I imagine the list actually goes a lot longer than what we think.
Oh yeah. No, like what we haven't even talked about, like medical implications, right?
Sure.
For using within the medical field, it's like, imagine all the stuff that you're collecting, all that, information that you're collecting or could collect through biometric technology. That would be like, there's technology that is able to detect certain illnesses just by, like, I've seen stuff on just like photos, but also like collecting certain like smells of people, like
Oh
they have
shit.
ways of detecting those things, and so that there's different ways to detect those things really early, or feeding x-rays or MRI scans into computers to analyze them has been starting to yield better diagnostics than human beings are able to
Right.
do.
For sure.
And so, like, is that part of it? Like, if the United States bans that, and like, what's going to happen, like, to the VA that has to,
Yeah. Are all Medicare patients.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Like,
So I hadn't even considered that as a direction. I was thinking like just banking security and whatever. But yeah, like all that information, that would be like a significant loss.
yeah.
So I wonder, like, if on the affirmative you get to try and kick out of that saying, like, is that the collection of personal data using I suppose it is, because they have to collect it in order to test it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if you'd be able to really boot your way out of that one. Yeah. So maybe the health route is like some of your best ground on the affirmative.
Maybe. I
Or no,
mean,
excuse
like,
me. Sorry, that would be on the negative. On the negative, saying like, don't ban it because we need this kind of stuff.
now the difference though is, I there's a difference between personal data and metadata though, right? It's like, if you're using a bunch of different MRI scans in order to get a better way to diagnose cancer, let's
Mhm.
say, that's not being based off of personal information. You're not necessarily collecting personal information. In fact, you could strip the personal information from those things and use it as metadata, and you would have a lot of data in which you could apply your stuff to it. And so maybe there still is a way around that I didn't quite anticipate before now, and therefore I'm unprepared to talk about.
So that would be just anonymized data, but
Yeah.
even still, that gets cracked down on. So like GDPR was saying that no, Google, you're not collecting anonymized data. You're allowing it to be super personal. So give you the
Mm.
example, like Google Analytics that like tracks users to a website. This is like what was the major point of all these lawsuits that Google lost out huge on it. They say that all the information is anonymized. So Jared, if you come to my website, I'm not able to see that Jared Miller in Long Beach, California came to my website. But the thing is, I can kind of see that. So I
Yeah.
am able to see like a male person of this age living in this city with this IP address came to my website. So it's basically everything but your name, it feels like. And that information is all totally tracked and stored and visible and accessible. And then I can sell that and use it for whatever purpose that I want. So I think you could probably, if I were on the affirmative side, I think I'd probably nail that down and be like, just because something is anonymized does not actually make it anonymous. Like as soon as
Yeah.
something is tied to a person in some way, like it can be unwound to still be that person's information.
Yeah, like that sort of reverse engineering component of finding it. I mean, it does take a bit of work to get there. Like, just to be
Sure.
fair on that one. I mean, I push back on. It's like, just because you can do the work needed in order to find that doesn't necessarily mean that it's like a security risk. Maybe.
I think
It's
that
like,
it's never a risk to everyone all at the same time necessarily. It's like
yeah,
the risk scenario, like what we create is this fear of like they will get your information and take your data and take the money out of your account and your medical records, and it feels personal. But I think the harm, like when you're saying like what happens to the VA, or like when it is personal information that needs to be collected in order for
right.
this procedure to really be, or this diagnosis to be the most accurate, then yeah, like that would be a substantive harm to any, person that's using federal government resources for their medical purposes or any other kind of purposes like that. So yeah, it's a pretty meaty debate. I thought that it would be really one-sided, but actually it looks like that's more evenly balanced than I thought.
Usually when you find more and more examples, right, it's like, because this one has so many different applications that like you gravitate towards one application of biometric technology and you forget the others, and so that one application that you're thinking of is like, oh, that's bad, therefore it's all bad, you know what I mean? But then you look at a completely different application that still falls under the category. You're like, oh, now it's a debate because of that. How you engage that debate in competition is tricky, though, because there's so many different avenues.
Like public forum lends itself more, or at least it did. I don't know. It may have changed quite a bit in the years, but it seems to lend itself to that. Like, let me pull out a few examples. And then you can just like weigh the best examples on one side versus the other. So it's like, okay, benefits, we can crack down on human trafficking by being able to identify missing persons almost perfectly and immediately. And like, so that's a wonderful plus, right? Like, to knock that down. But on the other side, you're like, yeah, and millions of people's fingerprints and facial or face scans are compromised, and now they have like millions of people's identities stolen or something. Like, yeah, that's also a very real risk if some data center at Apple were hacked or something. So trying to quantify and weigh those things out becomes the tricky part. And I think fortunately public forum kind of lends itself to that challenging way out. I think that makes for a fun debate.
Yeah. Well, good luck to everyone at the state, you know what I mean, on this particular topic. There's a lot of different examples for you to go for, and I wish everyone the best on this topic. All right,
cool.
All right, hey everyone, that's our time for this week. We'll be back next week talking about yet another most important topic of all time. All time. All right. We are Tim and Jared. We will see you then.